The Dark Eye, known in its country of origin as Das Schwarze Auge. I'm kinda glad they didn't go for a literal translation with this game. As one might expect from a game from Germany, it is very detailed and very thorough. And it scratches all the right itches for me. The Dark Eye is a game with a long history, about 30 years or so, with the first edition being released in 1984. It has since had several new editions, published novels, and even video game adaptations, with many of these receiving English releases. Today, though, we'll be talking about the English translation of The Dark Eye 5th edition. First and foremost, the core rulebook is technically all you need to play this game, and it's available in many different formats, from full-size hardcover at about 60 USD, a smaller paperback at 20 USD, or a watermarked PDF at 20 USD. The core rulebook has a brief introduction to Aventuria, the continent this game is set on, which includes the various regions and people living there. It also has a brief overview of the rules, which includes summaries that, if glancing through cover to cover, give you a nice scope of what all is available. The book puts character creation at the front, and follows that up by systematically explaining all the crunchy mechanical gameplay goodness one chapter at a time. And finally, it ends with a nice recap of all the diagrams and charts you'll need to know, along with an index and character sheet. And as a bonus, if you spring for the hardcover, you also get these neato ribbon bookmarks that I love oh so very much. Let's talk about mechanics now. The Dark Eye uses two kinds of dice, the D6 and the D20. You can make do with just one of each, but ideally you want 3 sets, with D20s being in different colors. And speaking of 3s, there's 3 methods of dice rolling you'll use. First is for attribute checks, where you'll roll a single D20 and try to roll under the attribute in question. The 8 attributes are, of course, Courage, which is bravery and determination, Sagacity, which is knowledge and rationality, Intuition, which is empathy and hunches, Charisma, which is persuasiveness and personal magnetism, Dexterity, which is hand-eye coordination, Agility, which is speed and flexibility, Strength covers effective use of muscle power, and Constitution, which is health and resistance to disease. Worth noting is that any penalties or bonuses applied to the rolls affect the attribute, not the die roll. Any rolls of 1 automatically succeed and call for a confirmation roll, rolling again to see if the second roll is beneath the relevant attribute. If the confirmation roll succeeds, then it becomes a critical success, where much like in Dungeons & Dragons, the character succeeds beyond expectations. The reverse is also true of rolling a 20. The roll automatically fails. A confirmation roll is once again made, with rolling higher than the relevant attribute causing the failure to become even worse. Attribute checks are the simplest of all checks, and they lay the groundwork for everything else. The second type of roll is skill checks, which require you to make 3 different attribute checks, all of which must pass. What attributes are being rolled for differs from skill to skill, but it'll either be 3 different attributes, such as willpower, calling for courage, intuition, and charisma, or 1 attribute twice and another one only once, like self-control using courage, and constitution. Any penalties or bonuses that are applied to the skill checks are applied to the attributes used for each of those 3 rolls. Additionally, should one of your rolls fail, you have a number of skill points for this check that can be used to lower the result of your die rolls to make them succeed. Leftover points on these rolls are used to determine how well you succeed. Let's say somebody is using the Galkalai skill to make a show of juggling some daggers. This skill is based on courage, charisma, and dexterity. Assume our circus performer has a courage of 14, a charisma of 13, and a dexterity of 14, with a skill rating of 7. At this skill rating, the combined total of how much these skill rolls can miss cannot be higher than 8. So, if we roll 12 on courage, 1 on charisma, and 15 on dexterity, we've only missed by 1, so we can use one of our skill points to make that into a success. Galkalai isn't a skill that normally benefits from having points left over, so it's well enough that we succeeded. Requirements for critical successes and failures are a little higher for skill checks. Rolling a single 1 or 20 isn't enough. Instead, a pair of 1s is an exceptional success in a skill check, regardless of what the result of the third die is. The one exception being here if the final die is also a 1, making the already exceptional success even better. The reverse is also true for 20s. 2 is always a horrific failure, and 3 20s is the worst possible result imaginable. For an example of a triple 20 result, we can say our performer tried to end their dagger juggling spectacle with a dramatic flourish, but instead wound up throwing one of the blades into the crowd, and they wind up killing an innocent onlooker. Combat is the final of the 3 dice systems to know, and it functions similarly to attribute rolls. You roll your d20 and you're trying to get below your combat skill level, modified by either your character's courage or dexterity, depending on if you're using close or ranged combat. For every 3 points above 8 you have in courage or dexterity, you get a +1 bonus to either close or ranged combat, respectively. If you succeed on an attack roll, your target gets a chance to defend, using either their dodge or their parry rating for their equipped weapon, both of which are typically lower than the attack rating. If we were to go back to our juggler and say that they were now intending to end somebody with a thrown knife, and she has a 8 in thrown weapons and 14 in dexterity, this gives her a total of 10 to hit her target. If our knife thrower succeeds at this point, the target would then get to roll to defend. Character creation is very open-ended in the Dark Eye. You're given a certain number of adventure points, which are spent to determine everything about your character, their attributes, their skills, and any special abilities or advantages they have. In theory, as long as you obey the game's limits on what characters can have at their creation, you can customize your character to be exactly how you want. This is a daunting effort though, and one that could very easily go wrong without some sort of guidance. Luckily, the Dark Eye has some very straightforward instructions on making a character, which come down to picking a race, culture, array of attributes, and a profession from a list provided for you. Each of these choices you make has a pre-calculated point cost associated with it that you'll need to keep a running total of. The beauty of the system is this: if you're familiar with the various point costs of skills and abilities in this game, you could technically alter a profession if you don't like what it provides. In fact, this game anticipates that players will be doing this. It provides a list of alternate skill loadouts with different costs, such as the gambler variant of the rogue or the pirate variant of the sailor. After all these choices are made, you then spend whatever remaining points you have to round out your character with whatever skills, special abilities, and advantages you see fit, in addition to also picking up disadvantages if you want more points to spend. This is a very detailed game though, so there are a few limitations you should keep in mind when making your character. If you're playing as a magic user or blessed one, that requires an appropriate advantage first, as well as a special ability for your tradition of spellcasting. These are not calculated into any of the profession packages. If your character knows how to speak a given language, that doesn't mean they know how to read it as well. A character cannot initially spend more than 80 points in advantages, nor can they gain more than 80 points back from disadvantages. The maximums for everything starting out are listed on page 39, and they are dependent on the number of adventure points that you start off with. Various other maximums are listed on page 350. Each of these pages has a handy chart for summing up what these limitations are. The last part of character creation, when you're spending your remaining points, is where the cost system for this game really comes in. First, each skill has an improvement cost associated with it, rated anywhere from letters A to D. For example, earth and craft is A, leatherwork is B, metalwork is C. If we refer to this chart, found on page 400, we can see how much it would cost to improve either of these skills based on their rating. To improve earth and craft, it'll cost 1 point to raise it until it reaches rank 12, and a cumulative 1 extra for every point above 12. So all told, raising it to rank 13 would cost 14 points, 12 to raise it to, 12, and then 2 points to make the jump from 12 to 13. As we can see from this chart, raising skills above 12s is where it can get really expensive. No skill can be raised higher than its highest linked attribute, +2. So to raise Earth and Craft to rank 13, we need at least 11 in either dexterity or strength. Another thing worth noting is that any combat techniques start off at rank 6, so even though they might have stiff improvement rates, you don't really need a lot to max them out. though they follow the same rules as skills. The primary attribute, +2, is the highest it can possibly go. After you've spent all your character points, the last thing you need to do is calculate your derived stats, such as life points, arcane energy, and initiative. The formula for all these are located on the front page of your character sheet. The combat section of your character sheet also has space for the derived values of attack, ranged combat, and parry values of weapons. As I mentioned earlier, the value for close attacks is your skill rating with a weapon, +1 for every 3 points over 8 in courage. The formula is the same for ranged attacks, except it's +1 for every 3 points over 8 in dexterity. A character's parry value is half the skill rating of the weapon being used, plus a bonus 1 after that for each 3 points over 8 you have in the relevant attribute, which will either be strength or agility. It's a bit of a mouthful when described verbally, but it's otherwise consistent. I've included the formula here on screen, but you can also find it on page 51 as well. Fate points represent a character's luck, that metaphysical extra something that makes a hero, or a villain if we're going morally ambiguous or straight up evil characters. By default, characters start with 3 fate points, though the advantage luck can push this up as high as 6, and its disadvantage counterpart bad luck can drop it as low as 0. So for players who don't like having metaphysical tokens to influence dice rolls or other parts of the game, bad luck is actually a decent disadvantage to take to gain some points back. Though if you'd prefer to keep your fate points, there's a few neat things that they can be used for, such as re-rolling dice, going first in combat, or temporarily ignoring status effects. And in addition to that, certain abilities might also call for using them as well. Regaining spent fate points is easy, since 1 is regained at the start of every session, and at the end of an act, 1 or more may be regained, and at the end of an adventure, all of them are restored. Especially heroic actions could also restore an adventure point as well, though the most surefire method is to just keep pushing forward through the story. One final note about fate points is this. There's something that makes a character special, so much so that certain mechanics become unavailable to characters without them. So while it's already a little similar to Edge and Shadowrun, this also makes it somewhat akin to Gnosis from Anima Beyond Fantasy. That about sums up character creation for the Dark Eye. Most of the core rulebook is just that, core rules and the bare minimum you need to play. Rules, character creation, equipment lists, some creature write-ups, and some basic maps. There's no shortage of extra books if you're that way inclined though. For starters, there's already quite a few adventures that have been released, such as Revelations from Heaven, Aurivor's Doom, and The Vampire of Havana. There is also the Bestiary, just in case you want even more critters to throw at players, available in both small softback and full-size hardback. And if you really like fold-out maps and setting information, you can't go wrong with the Aventurian Almanac, which also includes a geographical and political map. In fact, there's also some page number references on one of these maps to show you more information about a given region on the map. Thanks for watching. If you found this interesting, give me one of those likes. And if you want to learn more about the Dark Eye or any other great but dense TRPGs, feel free to subscribe. And remember, videos on the internet are no substitute for reading your rulebook. So, with all that said, I am Aaron Derashedel, and I will see you all next time.